RugbyRenegade.com, the #1 online strength and conditioning program for rugby. Are you ready to get bigger, stronger, fitter, and faster and dominate your opposition? Welcome to the Rugby Renegade podcast, where we build machines.
Hello and welcome to the Rugby Renegade podcast. My name's Jamie Bain and it's great to be back for a new year and some new podcasts. Today it's with Nick Lumley, strength and conditioning coach with Scotland Sevens and soon to be head of S&C at Edinburgh Rugby. I don't know if he announced it in the podcast, but he mentioned it should be out there now. But really good podcast, loads of great information again as always, and a great discussion on periodisation and monitoring and issues that Nick sees travelling all over the world with Scotland Sevens. So give it a listen and let us know what you think. Hi Nick, welcome to the Rugby Renegade podcast. Why don't we start by just sort of explaining to the listeners how you got into strength and conditioning, some of the sports and teams you've worked with.
Yeah, all good. Thank you for having me. I kind of started like a lot of people did, I guess. I left uni, I did my NSCA, so the CSCS, I did all that. Did a little bit of shadowing for maybe 4, 5, 6 months in athletics. Spent a fair bit of time with various different UK-based coaches and kind of hoping that was enough to get a job. And a few job applications later, I realised it wasn't. So I kind of committed myself to working for free for a year, and I went to applied to a few places. And back then, that was 2008. 2007, people were quite, people would bite your hand off to have a sort of reasonably well qualified sort of young person in to work for free for the year. Whereas nowadays, it's a lot harder to even get that because there's so many people looking to do it. But back then, I had a few different opportunities, and I went with one at the WRU. I did work with their national team for a full international season, mainly because the people I was working with. I worked with a guy, Craig White, who at the time was just left Leicester, where he's very successful in Wasps, and I'd heard a lot about him. And then Mark Bennett, who I'd also heard really good things about, and then there was Fergus Connolly there. So I had 3 really good people to share an office with. And then in between the international campaigns, they would send me out to the Dragons to help out the S&C team at the Dragons, and I worked with some really good guys there and got a lot of exposure to a lot of coaching hours there. And I just did that for a year really, and that probably learnt more in that year than I learnt from 3 years as an undergrad, purely because it's so applied to what you actually need to do and what you actually need to know and be able to implement. And that got me started. From there I went to the SIS in Scotland for a 6-month contract. I didn't get the job I went for. I came second, and they turned out through bad luck, a guy up there, Scotty Crawford, broke his hip and had to have a hip replacement I had to have surgery, but it was off work for 6 months, and so they rang me up out of nowhere and said, "We got a job. Only real fallback is we need you to start on Monday." And I think this was a Thursday they rang me, so I packed my bags and went, and that was me up in Scotland. And then towards the end of that contract, Gloucester approached me. They were looking for a number 3 to run their academy and assist with the first team. Ben Surf had just gone back to Australia, and I replaced him. Basically, that was Mark Bitkin, who turned out he was, a pretty close friend of Craig's at Wales, and Craig had put me in contact with him. I actually cold called Mark out of nowhere about the year before when I was at Wales looking for different jobs, and he kept my CV on file, and he rang me, and I went down and met them, and that was that. And then from Gloucester, I had 3 seasons of Gloucester, which was really good fun. I left there, went to Bath Uni, and worked with various different Olympic sports there, but predominantly judo, track and field, rowing. Really enjoyed that. I learned a huge amount from that, more than I ever probably thought I would do. The sort of 30 hours coaching, often one-on-one a week, it really tests your actual core skills. And from there, I went through the Commie Games. Quite lucky that Commie Games went quite well for my athletes, and kind of reached a point where I didn't really know what I could do next in that job, and had the option to go to Scotland there. So I took it up and moved up to Scotland again, and coaching the Sevens team. And I'm been here just over 2 years. So we're, for the regular season, I guess you're mid-season, but for Sevens we're just starting really, and we're just at the start of my 3rd season on the Sevens, and that's me. And obviously people are gradually it's public knowledge now. I'm leaving end of season to take over as head of S&C at Edinburgh, which I'm looking forward to, which will be in June. So that's kind of how the last 9 years for me, how it's unravelled. But yeah, it's been pretty good to me. I've had a lot of good experiences. I've been very lucky to meet a lot of good people who've helped me on the way.
Yeah, and obviously congratulations on the new role with Edinburgh, and all the best for that. While we have when we have guests on, we try and get an insight into their sort of strength and conditioning philosophy, which it could be an hour-long answer, but in a kind of nutshell, what would you say your philosophy is?
Oh, I guess it's changed a lot. Because I've worked under good people, I guess I've always kind of taken things from them, but these days I just try and find what gives us the biggest bang for our buck and what works. And I guess the real thing about what I do at the moment and how my programs are set up is we try and constantly measure what we're doing and we'll track what we're doing so we know kind of what's working, but it's one size doesn't fit all. We have a few real core competencies that I think guys have to be good at, and I track guys' progress to that, and how I get guys to improve it, to improve and develop those qualities is individual. I don't subscribe to everyone has to do this, that, or the other. I think everyone needs to be a certain profile. In sevens, there's a certain profile we need to be, and that's across any sport. Whether we're dealing with long jumpers and vaulters and things like that, and athletics or rowers or judo. What does that sport require, and what are the best ways to develop that? And I keep things quite simple. Simple things done very well, 99% of the time, gives you the best results. And I guess that's a little bit of a waffly answer there, but in a nutshell, I guess that's how I've evolved, is get the basics done really well, monitor what you need to be good at, and then track your progress. And if things aren't working, don't be ashamed to admit that and to adapt and change.
Yeah, definitely assessing, as you go along is really important. So you said that those things you monitor. Could you give an example of some of the things you might monitor?
Yeah, so the big thing for us with sevens has been, or the group of players I've got at the moment, was speed. Huge thing for us. So every week we'll go through timing gates 2, 3, sometimes 4 times in a week, but certainly twice a week. As a part of our core monitoring, start and end of each week, as part of our weight sessions, we'll go through 10-meter gates. I've got a database of 2.5 years of data of each player, of them doing 10-meter sprints. We track where they are in pre-season, how it moves when you increase volume of weights lifted in the gym versus when you decrease the volume, increase intensity when the running volumes are higher. All these sorts of things, we track it. But I'm a huge believer, for our squad, we need to be quick. Another thing we want to be, we've worked hard, we want to be a bit bigger, and so we monitor body weight, body composition, we monitor speed, and how we make players quicker depends on their makeup. I've got a lad that's Fijian who's qualifies for Scotland through residency, versus some guys that are Kiwis or Kiwi born and who qualify through relatives, and other ones who are grown up and lived in Scotland all their lives, and they've got very different backgrounds, very different training histories, and so how you develop them and how you make them better, what the core things are, is very, very individual. I like to work with the individuals, get to know them. What is it that makes this person improve? What are the core things that this person responds well to? And then we train them. And you probably look at my programs, you'd probably say they're pretty boring, to be fair, and I couldn't argue with you. But we try and find what works for that individual and what works the best. And if you can identify what works the best, and I'm pretty persistent I'll be pretty persistently chasing that method until someone can convince me that, or I can convince myself that something else might actually produce better results, and then I'll repeat that process. But that's kind of how we work. We've probably got 5 or 6 things we measure. The big thing for us is probably the speed though. It's a huge thing for us. Like, max strength's important and we do track it, but max strength's only useful to us if we can transfer it to speed. And we're very lucky in the facilities we train at. There's 2 or 3 we use, and they've all got indoor tracks. The shortest one's 50 meters, and so we've got very good facilities to develop speed, and so we put a huge emphasis on that. And if some guys respond well to squatting, that helps them sprint fast, and great. Other guys don't, and then we do something else. It just depends on the individual.
Yeah, definitely. I think you're right. If you're monitoring it regularly, you can see when you need to change your intervention, or find out what works for some people and not for others. If you're not monitoring it, it's kind of finger in the air, just guessing almost. And also it's interesting you say about, I think coaches sometimes worry about if it's a boring program, they feel like they're going to entertain the athlete in some way. But if you get them good results, then, they'll be happy.
100%. The biggest buy, and I'm very lucky that the group of players I work with are very good trainers. They're very, very hardworking guys that do generally just want to improve. And our speed times have moved consistently in the right direction for the last 2 years through their hard work. And when that happens, and they see that happening, and when we set our speed stuff up, we've spent a bit of money on a big scoreboard, so every time someone runs through the gate, it's in the lights, it's in writing up there, so everyone can see it. Everyone knows what everyone else is running. It becomes very, very competitive. And guys see themselves improving. Most of the boys know what each other's PBs are as well as their own. That culture develops itself almost, and the guys buy into the training very quickly when they see it improving. Another thing as well with speed is, I personally believe it's very important, but on top of that, I've never met an athlete in any running-based sport that doesn't want to get quicker.
Yeah. And you obviously said speed is hugely important for sevens, but how else do you approach training differently for sevens? Obviously, it's a very different game in terms of the demands of it.
Yeah, the conditioning, we've got our own kind of philosophies on it, or that I guess evolved over time. I think I don't know a huge amounts what other teams do. I know what England do very well, so I'm pretty good mates with Dan. But each team does their own. We don't emphasise the aerobic component that much. I probably, I'll hold my hand up. I've probably made them almost weaker in my 2 years here. When I arrived, they were running very good yo-yos. There was guys running 21s and stuff on the yo-yo, but we went on the field and we felt that we were, and when the intensity of the game raised, we weren't necessarily in condition to deal with it. And so I probably made them a lot worse aerobically at yo-yos, but we still retain a level that we feel acceptable. I think if you're weak, you're going to suffer. But having a surplus aerobically, I don't know how much it benefits us, because ultimately the games aren't that long. They do help you recover, of course, and you need to have a decent level. But the nature of the training you do anyway, in terms of we do 7-on-7 in training and stuff, like this afternoon, the guys did 9 90-second 7v7 bursts. You're going to get with 30 seconds in between. You're going to get aerobically very fit from doing that anyway. And so we don't emphasize the aerobic component. We look at our anaerobic pathways. We look at our ability to mobilize lactate into our ability to move our lactate threshold, and then we look at our ability to buffer into what are sort of going through some longer efforts, and how effectively we can produce sort of longer bouts of high energy movements, and whether we can get better at that. Because ultimately, you watch sevens, most sort of phases of play maybe 30 seconds long, then you get a little break. And so the ability to mobilize and to clear in those rest periods and go again is really, really important. But on top of that, some of the really big moments of decide games, sometimes they're 90-second, 2-minute phases of play. And so in that period, you're producing huge amounts of energy and doing huge amounts of work. And so they're the components we put all our effort into. Beyond that, in 15s, I know a lot of people that probably emphasize the aerobic side more. You don't need to go through the same running intensity. The recovery period's a bit more generous, and so it influences how you condition the guys, how fit the guys need to be. You can obviously carry more body weight in 15s. Because obviously the running volumes are lower, so those things are different. But ultimately, the games aren't that different. And if more 15s players wanted to play sevens or tried sevens, you'd probably find the game would probably evolve, and you'd actually realise the typical sevens athlete might change slightly. The reason why I think some of them are smaller, thinking of some of the really top attackers on the World Series, some of our players, but also some of the other teams' players, they're often quite small. That's not necessarily mean that smaller guys are necessarily better suited to sevens. I think it's because smaller guys sometimes are prejudiced against in 15s, rightly or wrongly, and so some of those guys go into sevens. But there's many ways the game's different. But I think a lot of it as well is the off-field. Playing 6 games in 2 days is tough, and a lot of that stuff off the field. How you recover, how you eat, all those strategies, ergogenic aids, things like that become even more important in sevens because physically it is so demanding.
Yeah, and that touches nicely on my next question, which is regarding your blog article at HLMR Media about the difficulties of travelling and playing multiple games and the monitoring you've done. Would you like to sort of enlighten us on that a bit?
Right. Yeah. So it's kind of evolved over time. When I first came into it 2 years ago and started travelling with them, you realise it's a stress. So how do you monitor this? So I actually reached out to people a lot cleverer than me, and it's actually Martin Bushite that gave me some ideas on the heart rate stuff we do, who said that you won't find any data on this because no other sport's stupid enough to travel in that close proximity to performance. Anyone else that's to Australia, they're going to go 2 weeks in advance. And we're going to go to New Zealand in under 3 weeks' time, and we're going to travel on a Friday, land on a Sunday morning, and play the next Saturday. It's tough. And so we started using stuff at home as a training load monitor, then also just playing around, looking at how we respond to travel. The theory is right that you're exercising heart rate. You could use HRV, and England are starting to do HRV with their stuff. You can do that just as well, but the way our program's set up is we have a group of core players, who maybe 9 of them plus a 10th guy who we have from the army, who are core, who are with us through the year, and other guys dropping in and out from the pro teams. And so I don't get consistent enough access to get enough HRV data. You probably need, from my experience, that you probably need 2 or 3 months consistent data with 3 or 4 measures a week, so you can establish coefficient of variation, you can establish some rolling averages, and you can look at with a bit more confidence some of the changes and have a kind of a reference point to refer back to. It's hard to establish that with our program, but with an exercising heart rate we get very low CV of our data, very, very consistent outputs, but we still get quite big changes, and you probably only need 2 to 3 weeks of measuring some baseline stuff in the morning to be pretty confident. It's very, very consistent. You'll get an average for that athlete very quickly, and you can establish what their CV is, and you can then work on what is your smallest worthwhile change, and what you're going to see as meaningful, and what you're going to then see as a red flag. You can establish all those things so much quicker than exercising heart rate. So we just started doing it at home. We do it twice a week at home. So every Monday and Friday on our program, we'll do weights in the morning. We'll do weights in the morning, and we'll measure an exercising heart rate, and we'll measure the 10-meter sprints alongside our normal kind of wellness. So we use like a knee to wall, sit and reach. We obviously measure body weight like everyone else does. We do a groin squeeze, then some ratings of energy and soreness, and we do like a hand grip test as well. We do, and we've just got, again, same process. We've got a database we've got quite a lot now for our core guys last couple of years, but guys come into the program, and it's quite quickly establish what their average is. You can establish what their kind of ranges are for after heavy and light days, and you can establish a smallest worthwhile change pretty quickly. And we also, we do our basics around signal and noise and that kind of stuff. So we know, is the data reliable? How much trust can we place on it? What's been quite good now is that in the last sort of year, the Neil Potts and the other guys at SIU have introduced a lot of the stuff at the pro teams. The pro teams are measuring stuff. So that's my first year here. We were kind of a new player would come in from a pro team. We'd have to start all our baselines, but now we're in a position that got a bit more unity across the pro teams where they measure similar stuff to us. So I can speak to Ash Jones at Edinburgh or Studio at Glasgow, and they'll just send over every player coming in. They'll send over that player's data from the last 2 or 3 weeks, and it's pretty easy to do. And so that's made things a lot easier. But we measure this stuff at home, and then when we go away, we just, same thing. We measure it in the mornings. We measure the heart rate every morning. We've also got a jump we do every Monday, Friday, and every morning when we arrive. And we just started measuring it. And that's the same I'd say to anyone who's trying to monitor their athletes. Just have a look at it, measure it, see what you get. Don't expect anything, and just be open-minded to what you get. And we've done, and we've actually found now that when we travel to Dubai, we've had, I've done the last 2 years going to Dubai, we've almost had identical monitoring each from the 2 trips. Day 1, we get a certain picture. Day 2, you get a certain picture. Day 3, you get a certain picture. And so it's made our planning a lot easier. The younger boys are a bit different, because younger guys, I mentioned in that article, younger guys travel differently, it seems, but by and large it's been quite consistent. And so you put plans in place with a bit of confidence, thinking, okay, the last time we went there, this happened, so we imagine we'll probably train on this day, and we'll kind of distribute our loading in a certain way because of that. And it's been reasonably consistent that each time we've gone to certain places. But things do get thrown up. Now, when I first started doing it, I thought a rise in heart rate would be a sign of fatigue and a drop would be a sign of good adaptation. But the more I've learned about it, that's not the case at all. We get these sudden drops in heart rate, which are probably indicative of actual greater stress. It's hard to point it to exactly to research behind it, but the best indicator I found is potentially like a inhibited catecholamine release. So whilst you drag your body across the shuttles that we do for our heart rates, you're doing it at a lower heart rate because you're not releasing as much adrenaline because your body's in a state of stress. It's like this, a bit like the HRV profile you get, where you get these sudden like you get a real drop. HRV or lower at a time, then you get a sudden increase, which you think, that's a good adaptation. It's actually not often, a lot of the time, because your body just reaches a breaking point where it says, you know what, enough's enough, I'm just going to shut down. And I'm not sure we necessarily reached that level, but we first measured a drop in heart rate in New Zealand 2 years ago, after a tournament where we'd gone pretty well. We'd had a really stressful 2 days of playing. We then measured the heart rate the morning after, and it drops, and I was like, that makes no sense at all. We should be stressed. We've just got our lowest heart rates I've ever measured. And back to the drawing board, you realise actually what's going on, and we've actually measured those drops now quite consistently over the last couple of years over certain periods. Travelling to Hong Kong's another one because it's our hardest travel. 8 hours east is really difficult in your circadian rhythm, and so that always gives us drops. If we measure it the morning after really hard contact and conditioning at home, occasionally we see drops in players, and sometimes when guys are suffering with illness we see it. And so yeah, I mean, it's the actual details of that might not interest all of your listeners, but the process is I would urge people to point to is to follow would be, have a look at what you want to measure, what you covering your bases, and then don't prejudice yourself or expect to measure anything in particular, because from my experience it's very hard to predict or second guess what's going to happen, but be prepared to react to whatever it throws up at you. And that's kind of what we've done. We've evolved it over time. Adding in jumps has been quite useful because they recover at a different speed to the heart rate. I think the heart rate stuff we measure on the road is more linked to circadian rhythm, whereas the jumps seem to be linked more to your neuromuscular system, your ability to express power. So, after probably 48 hours in location, we tend to find that the jumps improve and they get back to baseline, whereas the heart rates will sometimes recover in that time, but in a tough location like a Hong Kong or in New Zealand, they might take an extra couple of days, and so it just affects slightly how we grade our training. Really interesting. We've got a lot of data looking to write up, but a fair amount of help from the guys at Aspetar Hospital, a guy Pete Filer I talk about in the articles, but also a guy Andrew Murray who's actually moved to Oregon now, but who was at Aspire. So having links to those guys has been good because they know a lot more than I do, and every time I confuse myself with what I'm measuring, I just kind of fire it over to those guys, and they've helped me out a lot with interpreting some of the data and doing a bit of the stats and numbers and analysis on it. So it's worked pretty well for us. I don't know how much of it I'll use in 15 or how I'll use it in 15s yet. I'm still trying to figure out how much of it I can do on a daily basis with a lot more players than I've got at the moment. But certainly the same process I'll certainly be looking to implement, where you try and cover your bases more into what you need to, and then react to what you find.
Yeah, and what I found interesting was what you said about obviously the more experienced travellers, have adapted and recover quicker, and it just highlights if you're monitoring it, then you can deal with your players on a more individual basis. And that's definitely the way forward. It's all that about knowing your players, but if you've actually got data for it as well, it makes it more powerful.
Yeah, it does. I'm lucky. Our head coach is very interested in it as well. He'll often, come be knocking on my door in the hotels and asking what the monitoring is that day and asking how the players are responding. He's interested in it, and it's been really useful. There's one of those things where there's not really any evidence out there. Like, no one's ever really documented how teams travel, how different ages of people or different ages travel, but also the influence of travel experience on performance. And so you won't find anything on it, and so only by measuring these things we've kind of found it. And anecdotally, I feel myself I can, we go to New Zealand, I'll probably sleep okay and get over it fine within a couple of days, whereas when I first started doing this, I found it really, really difficult. It kind of knocked me out for 4 or 5 days, but this will be my fourth trip to New Zealand, and so I've got to the stage now where you accumulate a bit of experience of doing it, and you just, I don't know, you learn to travel better, you learn to sleep better. I think you relax a bit more. But yeah, like you say, the individual approach it gives you has been really useful for us because same way after tournaments, we've got certain players we find. I think it's by and large it's some probably our quickest players, the more explosive ones. They tend to take longer to recover after tournaments. Whatever reason that might be, but we consistently observe it, and so we'll people that don't know how sevens work, we'll say this next trip we'll go to New Zealand, we'll play Saturday Sunday in New Zealand, we'll fly to Australia on the Monday morning, and we'll be in Sydney the next weekend playing Saturday Sunday again. And so you've got a training week on the road trying to recover from a sevens tournament and then get ready for another. So the recovery on week 2 is really, really important. And so certain guys at the start of that week 2 will do very little, and some guys will do a bit more because they recover at different speeds. And again, that's something our monitoring's given us. It kind of, it highlights very quickly the speed that guys recover at and how they recover. And so that's something we probably brought in over the last 12 months is individualizing the recovery processes after tournaments, because it does vary quite a bit.
Yeah, and just out of interest, Nick, what's your favourite tournament you've been to?
In terms of travel, the experience and everything, and seeing the country, Cape Town's brilliant, and Hong Kong, the two that really. Vancouver was good. It'll be better this year because they're opening the whole stadium. Last year it was just the bottom 2 tiers. It's a great city, Vancouver, but in terms of the whole experience, the cities and everything else, Hong Kong's the one because it's the whole whole of Hong Kong set up for it. But in terms of the tournament, Cape Town really appealed to me. We've also got good memories of London, but because we won it last year. But in terms of the whole package of everything and the experience, I'd probably lean just towards Hong Kong. But yeah, it's hard to separate those two.
Yeah, lovely. So we spoke about your blog on HMR Media. You did another one about periodisation. Why don't you sort of tell about it, and I'll sort of say my thoughts, because I found it really interesting.
I guess I probably should have referred to that at the start when you were asking about philosophy, because that probably outlines it better than I'm able to articulate it to you. But it was more like, I think people overthink things and try and. There's a big danger in what we do with the competition for jobs, and everyone's got a degree, everyone's got a master's degree, everyone's trying to show everyone how clever they are. But in reality, I think they sometimes miss the basic point. And the basic point I was making was, the more you get to understand training, the more you realise how simple it is. The body adapts to stress, and whatever stress you place it under, the body will respond to meet that stress better next time it's exposed to it. So if you go and do in the gym and do a lot of squats, you're getting better at squats. That's what you're getting better at. You're getting better at timing the movement. You're getting better at absorbing force in the eccentric phase, of retaining energy, reusing energy, and executing the movement in a balanced and coordinated fashion. And you've got motor recruitment involved in that. In terms of rate coding, in terms of maximum recruitment, you've got your inhibitory systems that will hopefully dampen down slightly. You've got, obviously referring to afferent and efferent feedback. All these little things, there's loads you can point to that all affect your ability to do a squat. But all you're really doing is making your body better at that movement. But we do it because we hope that's going to improve the jump height or to your ability to sprint. But it's not a direct. It's just a relationship. People that are good at squats tend to be good at sprinting over 10 meters, for instance. But that's all it really is. Your body gets exposed to a stress, and then it gets better at meeting that stress next time and producing a movement or skill, whatever you're developing. That's really the essence of what training is. If you train too hard, you need to recover. The person that trains the best is the one that does the most training and recovers from it ultimately. And then, if you want to get bigger, then lift to failure. If you want to get stronger, then lift heavy weights. If you want to get fitter, then do aerobic work or anaerobic work, whatever it is you're limited by. That's what you get better at. And how you organise all that, and is that just, my point is that just common sense, or is that some clever periodization model? Because most of these things that people point to, and there's different squat programs, you've got your 5-3-1s and all your stuff on websites like T Nation and stuff like that. It's all well and good, but I've never seen anyone take those programs and compare it to someone who just does, just implements those basics and shows me that the periodization or the structure, there's anything clever going on that makes that program better than just doing the basics. And if those programs do or don't work, I think it's because they either do or don't adhere to the basic principles.
Yeah, definitely. I think the thing you've kind of highlighted is the consistency. If you do it consistently and you improve, and that's going to carry, and it's in something that carries over to your sport, then you're going to improve your sports performance. Whereas if you're trying to do different things, or you don't know what is going to improve your sports performance, that's when it can all get lost, I think.
Yeah, I think so. And I think if you look at you're right. And if you look at the stuff people refers to and the different periodisation models that have been kind of around since probably the 60s or 70s, guys like Verkhoshansky that first documented it, and Medvedev and people like that, they were dealing with different populations to us. Like Verkhoshansky, the one I talk about in that article, but he's dealing with top class long jumpers who reached a point where they weren't getting any better. But I mean, how many of us ever take athletes to the point of diminishing returns where, they literally stop responding to training? Because that's pretty much what he reached. They were just had the training they were doing was just maintaining them where they are. So we had to reorganize things, and he realized you had to intensify the stimulus and do more max strength sessions and closer proximity to each other to overload that aspect of the body in order to get positive adaptation, and then do the explosive stuff, and then do his kind of transfer special strength stuff, and then in that order, and he got an effect. But he also is very clear that unless you reach that point of diminishing returns, then you don't necessarily need to go down that approach. He would have done a bit more. He did a bit more of a kind of conjugate, kind of parallel approach, as he called it, where you do a bit of this, that, and everything together. Because your bodies of the younger athlete or rugby player, one strength session a week might be enough to make you stronger. Certainly two will be, you'd have thought, of most rugby players. In which case you can then do some, extra speed work, extra explosive, whatever you need to get better at. But you can group it together slightly differently. If that no longer works, then Verkhoshansky's stuff, as he talks about, his block training definitely would be a good solution. But I've never met someone, I've never worked with anyone who's literally generally doesn't respond to training.
Yeah, and especially in rugby, I mean, you can probably think of some, really good athletes who are rugby players who, if they weren't rugby players, they could probably get there. But because of the demands of training and playing week in, week out, they're not going to get to that level. So it's just consistently, as you say, working away at the basics.
Yeah, I mean, it's spot on. I mean, and it's a combination, I think, of ability, but also training history. It's, you could probably train like we do without full on, like a track and field athlete would, doing it full time for several years before you reach diminishing returns, whatever your ability is. And so, I talk in the article, I got to see, very lucky to see guys like I saw Greg Rutherford and DeGrasse training in the summer over at in America, and they train, they do a strength day, a power day, a speed day, pretty much through the season. And whether that's ideal or not, I don't know, but they reach pretty good level of performance through doing that. And so, you could argue maybe would they have done more if they'd done another approach? I don't know, but it's hard to argue the results those two got. And so, I wouldn't necessarily copy their programs, but it's I just don't think it's periodization that makes a lot of these programs work or not. It's whether they adhere to the basics or not, and whether they tick the right boxes and whether they incorporate the right fundamentals or not. And if they do, then programs tend to work, and if they don't, then they tend not to. But I just think people try to overcomplicate it for whatever reason, and it's a little bit misleading.
Yeah, definitely. And it's probably what we've just spoken about will make this question quite difficult. We ask every guest on the podcast, what do you think is the biggest mistake rugby players make when it comes to S&C? And it could be what you just said, but you're going to have to say something different, I'm afraid.
Okay, I would have originally said following too rigid periodization. I think the biggest thing players follow is that's a good question actually now. I'd probably go with overemphasizing certain aspects of the players. Particularly younger players, they get it into their head. They look at the guys on TV and they try and follow that. And so, your number 8 looks at Kieran Reid, I want to be like him. Or they look at they look at whoever it might be, a Billy Vunipola or a Stuart Hogg or whoever. And that's the guy I want to be. That's the guy I want to follow. But ultimately, it's what works for them isn't necessarily work for you. We're all different, and I think the times are moving on where there isn't a certain way that players or people have to train. It's about figuring out what works for you. And people look at the top back rows in the world and you think, okay, they're all 105 kilos, most of them. Well, if you're 25 and you're walking around at 95 and you've got 5-10 years training history, you're probably never going to reach 105. Or if you do, you're probably not going to be a better player for it. And so I think players probably or particularly players that are trying to break into the elite, they probably look at the elite guys at the elite end of the game and try and copy that. Whereas it's more about working out what's probably best for you. How are you going to be your best athlete? So I'd urge people to target performance outcomes more than anything else. So where are you right now? What's your 10-meter time? What's your 30-meter time? What are your max strength levels like? What's your aerobic level like? How can I make them better? And also work out which ones of these are limiting me on the field. And then you develop those, and you're going to be a better player. I think trying to copy an image of what the top guys, what they are, and try and kind of copy someone else. I can't think of any sport where trying to copy other people helps someone reach their potential.
Yeah, and I noticed you laughed when you said, link it to performance outcomes. But it is an issue. Like, people sort of think, I've just got to get fitter, so they'll do, a random running session. I've got to get bigger, so they'll just do hypertrophy sessions or, a bodybuilding program.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. It's got to be about performance, and that is a massive mistake. They sort of see things as separate entities as opposed to saying, I need to do the right thing to improve this part of my performance. Yeah,
I think that's also why, there's no hiding the fact that rugby in the UK has a pretty bad drug problem. Not at the elite level. The elite level, and I'm not speaking out of turn here. If you go on the UK anti-doping website and look at current doping sanctions, the number of non-elite rugby players on that list is shocking.
Yeah.
By and large, it's players that are looking at the elite end, looking at guys that carry a lot of muscle mass, that are pretty big and heavy guys. That's what I need to be, and so they take shortcuts. It's indicative to me of that same culture of looking at the elite end and just trying to copy it, not understanding the process and probably the 5-10 years of work that's gone in to make that elite player what they are. And I think it's a representation of the same thing you're talking about, where people, particularly younger or non-elite players, look at something on the TV or look at the elite end and just try and copy it without really understanding that it's a bit more complicated than that.
Yeah, definitely. Last question, Nick, 'cause I'm conscious of time. What advice would you give to someone trying to get into strength and conditioning?
Oh, that's a good question. It's a very tough industry to get into. Looking back what it's like now versus when I was trying to break into it even 9 years ago, it's changed so much. First thing I'd say to owners, make sure you really, really want it, because there's a lot of other ways to earn a nice living and have a nice life without having to go through what you have to go through to get into strength conditioning. But if you do want it, then awesome, because it's a great job and it's so much fun. It's very rewarding. The biggest advice is, obviously, everyone now goes out and gets a degree. Everyone then goes out and gets a master's. Everyone then goes out and volunteers as much as they can at a local club or an institution, whatever it might be. But looking at yourself as with the hat of an employer on, whether you're doing that at Gloucester or I'm doing that, if you advertise a job, you're going to get probably 100 applicants, and most of their CVs are going to look identical. And so if you're looking to get an interview somewhere, you need to stand out. What is it about you? If you're a young coach, think, what is it that's going to make me stand out? What is it that I'm going to do better than my competition? What's going to make me get that interview over the other 100 applicants or the 99 applicants out there? And then find out what that is and make sure you're blooming good at it, because without that, and so there's other skills, the industry's moving and it's changing. Like, there's other sports like Australian rules football and NFL and sports that I've been lucky enough to have a little look at the last couple of years. They're employing people with really good analytics backgrounds, really good stats background. I'm sure that'll happen in rugby with the use of GPS and the different monitoring systems, and clubs invest in databases now and things like that. There's a big need for guys that have good analytical skills and good data handling skills alongside their core coaching. And guys that get good at that, then that will make you very employable to clubs going forward, because it's a skill set I think people are going to recognise, and that if they don't already, they will do. There's something that's very useful, things like strength diagnostics are very useful for some clubs. The other thing that hits you very quickly now is, the best teams out there are the teams that tend to keep their players fit. And so guys that are very good at the injury return to play side of things, teams that are very good at the injury prevention side of things, those things are valuable. And if young coaches you need to have the basics covered across the board, because it's going to be your job, it's going to be your bread and butter. But on top of that, I'd urge a young coach to just establish what it is I'm going to be good at, and just put a bit more time into certain areas. So you've got a bit of a profile, a little bit of a niche, because without that, you're going to struggle to get past the application process unless you're already interning at a club and you're in the right place at the right time. But it's hard to really plan for that to happen, because you never know where the right place and what the right time is going to be. So you've got to kind of build yourself to be able to go in cold to a job somewhere and get the job on merit. And to do that, you're going to have to develop, something that makes you stand out. And so, what is your niche going to be, and then establish that and get blooming good at it, because it's a very competitive field.
Yeah, definitely great advice, Nick. And lastly, where can people learn more about yourself?
Oh, good question. There's not a huge amount of me on. I've just started writing a couple of articles for Martin in his website, HMMR Media. I do have Twitter at Lumley_Nick. That's probably the best place. You won't find a huge amount on there. But yeah, you're welcome to contact me, and I'm pretty open to sharing things, and to, if I've got stuff of interest to people, or people have got questions, I'm pretty open to sharing and helping people where I can. So yeah, fire away if you want to.
Yeah, that's great, and we'll share links to that in the show notes, and obviously links to your 2 articles that we mentioned. Nick, thanks very much. All the best, safe travels to New Zealand, Australia. Hope all goes well there, and all the best with the new position in Edinburgh. Cheers.
Thank you very much.
So there you go, another great podcast. Thanks again, Nick, for sharing those insights into your career and your strength and conditioning philosophy. And all the best in the next couple of weeks over in New Zealand and Australia with Scotland Sevens, and all the best, of course, to your new role with Edinburgh. In the meantime, guys, please check out rugbyrenegade.com. Loads more articles and podcasts to come. If you don't want to miss out, then please subscribe on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, TuneIn, whatever podcasts you use, and please give us a 5-star review. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to the Rugby Renegade podcast. For more quality rugby strength and conditioning information, check us out at rugbyrenegade.com. Rugby Renegade, building machines.